What does it mean to live a resilient life? I'm Manion. I lost my brother to war and my mom to cancer, and I've learned a lot about myself along the way. Now, as the CEO of Travis Manion Foundation, I'm on a journey to explore what it means to be resilient against life's many challenges. Join me and some incredible guests as we ask ourselves the hard questions and define what it means to struggle well. Welcome back to another episode of the Resilient Life podcast. I'm really excited to have our guest today, Ashley Southard. Ashley, you first showed up in my world as I was doom scrolling one night on TikTok. And one of your TikToks came up and it was about grief. And you were talking a little bit about your grief journey. And I didn't really know your story. I didn't know your story at all. And then started learning more about you and your life and your loss. And it's just, you've amassed a big following on TikTok, which I applaud you for, given the platform that you have and what you're talking about. But it's such an honor to have you here today and to talk a little more about your story and how you're walking through life over the past couple of years. We'll put it that way. So Ashley, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. It's not lost on me. I want to start for anyone that may not be familiar with your story. I'd love you to tell us about Andy, your late husband, because I think that's really important that we share the stories and that when we're talking about our lost loved ones, they have some context on who these people were outside of uniform and who they were to us specifically. So if we could start there and tell us a little bit about your late husband, Sergeant Andy Southard.
I would love to. My husband was the highest caliber of man you could imagine. He had this bottomless well of work ethic where he gave 100% at work, and then somehow he had this reservoir when he stepped back over that threshold in our home to give 100% at home as a husband and as a father. And I was just in constant awe and admiration for how dedicated he was to the things he loved, and not just like his family, but his friends, his job, his hobbies. And he was an adrenaline junkie. So I've been checking off some things for his bucket list. And there are quite a few times that I've thought to myself, I wish he had less adrenaline focused hobbies. But that was part of who he was, and a reason that he chose the job that he did. He was a Black Hawk crew chief in the 160th, and that was his dream job. And he pushed for it. And at the young age of 26, he had achieved everything he wanted to achieve career-wise. He always made the joke. He's like, well, I got to come up with new dreams now. It speaks to his work ethic and to who he was and how just honorable and honestly humble. I didn't know how cool he was on the military side until after his passing, and I got to hear lots of stories and stuff. But we started out as best friends for 2 years. We met through mutual friends, started out as best friends.
Where did you guys meet?
We met in El Paso, Texas.
Okay.
And he deployed to Egypt for a year after that. And so we had stayed friends, but, just kind of like blurring the lines between friendship here and there through conversation. And then we both ended up at Fort Campbell, Kentucky. And in a weird turn of events, and we both landed there, and we went out for Valentine's Day one night, and no one was really expecting it to snow, and all the snow just like dumped down while we were in the restaurant, and we walked out, and it was just us. It just felt like the world paused. And he looked at me and he said, I am so ridiculously in love with you, I can't stand it. And I was like, same.
And that was it. That was the start of your love story.
We were married 28 days later.
Oh my gosh, that's incredible. So how long that was one of your first dates, that Valentine's Day date?
Our first, I wouldn't say first date. It was, so we had known each other for 2 years. We had been best friends for 2 years. And then that was like the first time we had like actively sought out dating. And it was just so natural, so comfortable. It wasn't awkward. It was just two friends hanging out. And I think that's kind of the basis of what our marriage was. It was built on such a strong foundation of friendship that everything else just kind of fell into place.
So, I've come to learn, like myself, you're a huge Swiftie. So you kind of ruined the friendship, and it worked. It was worth it in the end. So
Absolutely. I always advocate for ruining the friendship. So.
I love that. So you're a published author. You've written openly about your experience of losing your husband and, becoming a surviving spouse. How did writing become a part of your healing journey? Because it's been a huge part of mine. So I appreciate that, how you put yourself out there in that way. And I'd love to know how that came to be. Like, was that something you did prior to his death?
Yeah, so words have always been kind of my forte. It's where I've always felt comfortable. Writing has always been a big part of who I am as a person. And about 6 months before my husband died, we lost a dear friend, Zach Esparza, in the Medevac 9 crash in Fort Campbell, the Eagle Dust Off crash. And my husband flew that same flight pattern. Weekly. And I was so overcome with like the grief of not only losing this friend, but how close it came to home for us, that all I could do in that moment was write. And so I wrote a poem. And it was for Zach and for his family and for all the other 8 crew members that died. And it got some traction. It spun around. Brotalion picked it up and put it out in some of their Blue Skies Foundation stuff for their Gold Star Family Relief. And then 6 months later, when my own husband died, that poem got sent back to me. And it kind of sparked this. I wrote that to get through something that it felt close to home, but it didn't feel so intimate the way my own grief did when I lost my husband. And I was like, well, if I could write that to get through this, maybe writing would help me get through what I'm doing now. And one thing, I'm an avid reader as well. And I kept looking to books. I kept looking for, a how-to or a manual or something to help me through this. But everything I was finding was written from the perspective of hitting that acceptance stage, of hitting the
Yeah.
positive platitudes, the finding meaning portion of grief. And I wasn't there yet, and I wasn't ready to be there yet. And I wanted something that said, this is terrible, this is awful, and to validate where I stood currently in that grief. And so when I couldn't find it, I decided to write it. So I wrote my real raw experience living through those emotions, the ones that we don't talk about, the ones that are stigmatized, the ones that are, you feel like you would be judged for talking about. And that's kind of been my passion in this journey as well, is making sure no one else feels alone the way I did when I was processing the very raw beginning of this journey.
I find it so interesting that you say that, because, I remember like reflecting back, and it's not lost on me that you just passed the 2-year mark of your husband's death. And I was thinking, I was reading your stories that you were putting up over the last couple of days, and kind of what you were doing in that moment, and how you were working through that 2-year anniversary. And, it seems like you are a bit like me. So my dad is very clear to say, like, he's not very affected by anniversary dates. So like the day of Travis's death or Travis's birthday, they hit me. Like 18 years later, they still hit me. And my dad always says, April 29th is just like April 28th. It's just another day without my son. And I wish I could be that way, but there is something like, I get a pit in my stomach leading up to my brother's anniversary date. It's like I can feel it coming. And I think back to where I was 2 years out from my brother's loss, and the way that you are able to capture those feelings and where you are in your grief journey, as you know, we can affectionately call it. I don't know if I would have been able to do that. You know, I think 2 years out, I was kind of still in the place where, like you said, I was kind of embarrassed about how I was handling things and what I was doing and how I was surviving. And I ended up writing a book in 2019. And I remember when I put the first edit in, the publisher came back and they were like, come on now. Like, there's way more to what you were dealing with. And I said, like, I'm kind of embarrassed about some of the things. And they're like, well, that's what the people need to hear. And so I ended up doing the rewrite and putting it all in. And I still cringe sometimes when people are like, I read your book, it's great. And I think about the stories I told in that book and I'm like, oh God. And, you know, but we need to do that. Like, it's important to do that. And it's important to like peel this like picture off that you're going to go through these 12 stages of grief and this is what it's going to look like. And it's going to be, you know, and then you're going to get to this. It doesn't happen. And it never happens like that. And you do such a beautiful job of really being real and raw and open and honest. And I'm just very appreciative, like in this community, that we see more of that. And I think it's important.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, like you said, it's almost like your body remembers the date before your mind kind of catches up to it. And that's something I've really noticed. And that first year, the birthdays, the anniversaries, all of that, they didn't hit me because I prepared for them. I knew they were coming. But I feel like in this second year, that resiliency, that fight or flight, where I was like, if I can plan for everything, that coping mechanism of needing to control everything around me because I couldn't control this massive tragedy that happened not only to me, but to my children, to my life, to my in-laws, like to everyone that loved him, and also holding space for their feelings as well. Being able to this year just kind of really sit in those feelings. And I made it a purpose to this year. It was actually the day before the anniversary, and I woke up crying, and I could not pull it together. I could not. And usually I have all these coping mechanisms that I'm able to do. Like I'll get out in the sunshine, or I'll go, you know, take an everything shower, or I'll dance around to Taylor Swift and I'll put my headphones on and just like try to get endorphins or dopamine moving in some way. And that day I just could not. And I think it was just that anticipatory. Yeah. I know it's coming. My body feels it's coming. And there's no way to escape those emotions when they're such a huge part of who you are now.
Yeah. I was just having a conversation. I was at Arlington yesterday on Veterans Day, and I was having a conversation with my friend there, and I was talking about this idea that in the beginning, anniversaries, like the date of Travis's death, used to hit me so hard because I felt like getting further away, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, it was so scary for me. And I'm 18 years out from my brother's loss. And, my grief looks differently than yours does. Yours will look differently when you're 18 years out, but it's still there. It's still very much there. But I remember being at events with other Gold Star families, and they would say, I remember someone saying like, oh, I lost my brother 20 years ago in the Beirut bombing. And in my head, I was like, oh my God, I feel so bad for her. It's been 20 years. Like, I'm only 6 months out. And I kind of felt this sense of like, he was just here 6 months ago, and I was so glad that there was not that much time removed between when he was alive and when he died. And for me, he was still so real in that way. And, and now I'm the one who's like, yeah, I'm 18 years out, and it doesn't feel any different in a lot of ways than 2 years out, but I think you gain a lot of wisdom in that time. And I think you gain a lot of perspective on how things look. And I always say, when people want to talk about the moment we found out our lives were changed forever, and that's a lot. I'm sure you get that a lot. Like, tell us about the day, you lost your husband. I also think it's so important to ask, like, what did that love look like before he was lost? You know, like, what did you love most about Andy as a husband and as a soldier?
Honestly, I think it was his ability to just roll with anything. And I'm that sounds like such a surface level phrase, but to really think about like anything thrown at a person, to be able to turn it into a positive or to be able to like take the punch and keep rolling. Like it was so admirable to watch because, you know, my husband was special forces and I watched him assess for that program. And there were several days he came home with split lips and black eyes and doing combatives. And then he was coming home and making Christmas cookies with our kids, like at the table, and watching him just very literally roll with the punches during that time. And still show up and still have this like oh my gosh, he just poured so much love into everything. And you know, I was actually telling one of my other gold star friends here, we're pretty close, and I was telling, she was like, I wish we had met before. I wish we got to keep our husbands and still be close and still be friends. Like I wish I could keep you from the after and I wish I could keep him from the before. And I'm sure there's a lot of things, you know, the juxtaposition of that throughout everyone's grief journey. But, and I was telling her, I said, I don't know if you would have liked me because I'm kinder. I'm kinder now.
Yeah.
And that kind of comes from like, you know, the phrase like be the things you miss about the person you lost,
Oh, that's
the
so
things you
true.
love most about them. And so I've kind of taken on watching my husband be kind and roll with the punches and kind of, you know, adapt and improve. That adapt and improve, like that was the biggest thing that
Yeah.
I watched him do. It wasn't just adapting to his surroundings. He figured it out and then he improved it. And then he brought a positive. Then he made joy out of lemonade. And that's something that I've really tried to encompass that I loved most about him from before.
I love that so much. And it speaks to me so much because I am like, I talk a lot about living with intentionality now. And I say that a lot. I'm like, I was a completely different person before Travis died. I was apathetic. I was a bit lazy. I wasn't goal driven. I was just, I always say I was just kind of coasting through life. And I was watching my brother with just deep admiration and awe for everything he was accomplishing. And I was his biggest cheerleader, but I wasn't trying to meet him where he was at in any way. And, you know, I now feel like I have to, and that's why when he first died, I just started doing like crazy physical challenges because that's what he did. So I was like, I'm gonna run a marathon. That's the first thing I'm gonna do. And you know, I hadn't run a mile in like 5 years, but I was gonna do it because that's what he would have done. It's what he did. He signed up for the Marine Corps Marathon. So I'm like, all right, I'm gonna run it. Um, but I do think you adopt a lot of the traits that they had in order to, and I think it's more palatable for us because we feel like in some way we're continuing their legacy of service, right?
Yeah.
And but I also think Travis sometimes, and I'm sure you probably think Andy would be like, "What the heck are you doing?" Like, kind of, you know. And but it's good in that way. I know that, you know, again, grief can feel so personal and and it is so personal, and there's something almost taboo about making it public. I think about some of the things that I've written, and even just recently, I've put in stuff out that I have two teenage daughters that they've cringed and, you know, texted me and said, "Mom, take that down," you know, and because I think it's just a little too raw and honest for them to have their friends, frankly, seeing online. You do that too. Um, but with that comes a bit of criticism, right? And so I'd like you to talk us through your thought process between this idea of keeping your grief personal and then also not really caring and letting the world see it in a very public way.
Absolutely. You know, In the beginning, when he first died, I had this overwhelming sense to tell everyone. Like, I would be in the grocery store, I would be checking out the gas station, and it wanted to bubble out of me. My husband's dead. I had to say it. Like, I had to like get it out because it was almost like I needed people to not only like validate that there was this huge tragic thing that happened to me and my world stopped, but I'm at the grocery store and everyone thinks I'm having a normal day. Everyone thinks that I'm just a mom in a grocery store buying grapes. But my husband just died. And like, there was something so strange about watching the world continue on and me just being so devastated and like barely functioning and on autopilot. And so I started thinking about like, well, what if the person that I was just next to buying the bananas also, like, what if their mom just died, or what if their brother just died, or like I had no idea either. All these people that I've encountered, and I started thinking like, no one's ever said this. Like, no one's ever that I've found had this like really authentic approach to what the grief looked like. And, the reason I'm so passionate about it and the reason that I do try to be so authentic, even though I cringe when like I'll post a video and I'll watch it an hour later and I'm like, I'm going to take that down.
Yep.
That was not. But like the reason a lot of the times that I don't is one, because I'll get feedback that's like, oh my gosh, thank you for saying that. Like I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
And that also makes me feel really validated in that. But two, I would have judged me.
Yeah.
I would have judged me. My advocacy comes from a place of self awareness that prior to this happening to me, if you had said any decision that I had made in the past 2 years, if you had brought that up to me as this like third party situation, I would have judged it. I would have said, well, it's not what I would do. But that's the point, is that you don't know what you would do. You have no clue because it's so life altering. And there's a chapter in that book where I wrote my funeral came first, because I died that day too, because there was a version of me that he cultivated, that he created, that he loved, that she belonged to him and she deserved to be buried with him, and he deserved for that, because there was no way that I could go on in a life that he didn't exist in and be the same person. So a lot of that advocacy and a lot of the criticism that I kind of face head on and I try to overcome and I try to destigmatize in talking about these cringeworthy things is I would have judged me.
Yeah.
I would have looked at things I had done and thought, that's questionable.
Yeah. And I think so important for us to see those things and, as the third party, right? And you put it out there knowing that people are judging you. Like every time you put something up, your people are judging you, but you've got the other people that are saying thank you, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, it's a balance. And it's like every time, because the hate can sometimes be loud. The criticism is often the loudest. And sometimes I'm human. It gets to me. And as thick as skin as I love to say, I have, the grief kind of grates away at that over time as well. And there's this feeling of like, maybe I shouldn't, maybe I should dial back. But, for every hate comment or for every criticism that's out there, for every person that doesn't feel like I'm doing it the right way or I'm doing it the way they would do it, there's also people that are, I get messages all the time like, you saved me, or you helped me be kinder to my sister-in-law after our brother passed, or you helped me adjust to my mom dating again after my dad died. And there's all these little pieces where I'm like, okay, I am making a difference. Like there is a purpose in this. And that I kind of have to let that lead me. And that's something I've really admired about your journey as well. Not only that 18 years out, I know who Travis is from you, and seeing that, and also like the representation of siblings in the Gold Star community, because I feel like so often they kind of get sidetracked, like everyone's focused on the parent or the spouse.
They are the forgotten family member. I talk about it a lot with other siblings, and so I try to be a voice for them. Again, I don't always do it the best, but I try.
I love that it's just represented because I think people forget that so much of your identity is built around the sibling you grew up beside. So much of who you are is built around having this built-in best friend. And so when they die, it's losing part of your identity too. And I've seen that in our crash as well. I've watched some of the siblings kind of not get the same attention or not get the same support. And, we all lost the same person and we all loved them so dearly. And that grief isn't measured by the intimacy of the relationship. It's measured by the love that that person put out in the world. And to not honor that is to not honor their memory. And so I think you do a beautiful job of that. And I found it really inspiring that 18 years out, you still do it with so much grace. And that kind of gives me hope for continuing on to when I am also 18 years out.
Oh, I appreciate that so much. One of the things that I love about you, and it took me a long time, much longer than you, to realize that I could hold both grief and joy at the same time. I remember, like early on, I remember being in a room and everyone was laughing. And it was in between when Travis had come to Dover and before his funeral. So it was during the course of that week. There were so many people in the house and someone said something and everyone started laughing. And I was like pissed off and I couldn't believe, and I'm like, why is everyone, you can't laugh. Like no, there can't be any laughter or joyfulness. And I was standing at the kitchen counter and I just started crying. And my uncle put his arm on me and he said, I promise you're going to laugh again. And in that moment, I didn't think I would. Like in that moment, I never thought that I would find joy again. And I did, but it took me a long time. And I think I see that you can hold this place for both grief and joy. And you do that very well. And I'd love to know, like, was that immediate? Did that take a minute? What did that look like for you?
That was kind of one of those up and down things in the beginning. There was a bit of denial that really played into how I was able to show up in the beginning. I remember making jokes. Even getting ready for my husband's funeral, I looked at my friends and I had on this like body dress or whatever. And I said, is this too ass-tastic for my husband's funeral? And we all started laughing. And, it was like this moment of, dark humor, I guess.
Yeah.
And I was like, but it's ridiculous. I'm 32. I'm getting ready for my husband's funeral. My husband just turned 27. This is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. And so there was a bit of denial that played into that where I almost shoved it down. And I remember thinking at the funeral, like, I just have to play this part. Yeah. Like, I just have to play this part until he comes home, until he's like Tom Hanks with a volleyball on an island and they're going to find him and he's going to come home. And I just have to play this part so that everyone doesn't think I'm crazy. And then when he gets home, they'll see it. And so there was a bit of that played into like kind of finding the humor, the dark humor in the beginning. And that for me kind of transitioned into finding the joy in a very odd way. I guess one, because that was my husband's personality and humor, but also just because like when the denial lifted and I hit rock bottom and everyone had gone back to their lives and the memorials were over and the services were over and then it was just me and everyone else went back to living their life and my world still stopped and stood still. There was that moment of like, how do I move forward? How do I do these things? How do I, go grocery shopping? How do I buy my kids Christmas presents? How do I do all of these things? And for me, there came a point, and I read this phrase, and honestly, I can't tell you where I got it from, but it said, I just have to have really cool stories to share with them at the end of my life. Yeah. And I had Andy's bucket list, and there were so many things that were like kind of popping up, little signs, things like that, where I was like, all right, like if I fold, he's going to kick my ass when I get up there. Like if I let this drown me, that's not what he would want for me. Like we had this idea. We were best friends. We talked about the kind of life we wanted to live. We talked about how we wanted to raise our children and the lives we wanted them to have. And I was like, all right, like, yes, till death do us part. Sure, but I made promises that extend far beyond the reaches of like time and death. Those promises were to him and to our children and to our love story. And so I have to learn to carry both of these things because one, I have to have really cool stories to tell the coolest guy I know when I get back to him. But two, like I have to be all the things about him so that my daughter and my son still have those pieces of him. And I have to learn how to do that. And so I think very early on, that was a realization that I had, and I still struggle with it. I mean, there are still times when I have a good day and I'll post it. Like, I'll post it and I'll share it and I'll look back at it. I'm like, who am I? What right do I have to go to the beach, to take this dream trip, to go on a girls' trip, to what right do I have to live this life when he can't? And then there's the duality of that, of this, I have to live this life because he can't. I have to do these things because he can't. Because what a slap in the face it would be for him to die for me, specifically in service. What, that was his passion, that was his duty, that was his honor. If he died for me to have these freedoms, this life, this dream home, dream life that we would have built together, it would be a slap in the face to him for me not to find the joy in that and not to hold it with the reverence that it deserves for the sacrifice that he made.
I always think that too. It's like, Andy and Travis died, and you've heard about it. Andy loved what he did. Travis loved what he did too. I mean, and they died doing what they love, right? But they also died defending the freedoms that we hold so dear. So for us not to live a life that honors that, and live big, then we're failing them. And it's funny you talk about the till death do us part. I had a Gold Star spouse who's a friend of mine, and she used to keep this picture on her desk, and it was two skeletons, and they were hugging each other, and it said, "Whoever said till death do us part is just a bunch of quitters." And I loved that. And she very much operated on dark humor. And I do now too. I've gotten to that place where that is I guess it's a coping mechanism, but it is, the dark humor plays, but you have to watch who you use the dark humor in front of, right? You have to know that the person you're talking to is receptive to that, because sometimes I'll say things and I say it in front of company that doesn't respond in the way I thought they were. And I'm like, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I kind of use dark humor sometimes, but I've caught myself a couple of times with people just staring at me with their mouths wide open on an offhanded dark humor comment that I make. So gotta know who your audience is.
Dial it in. Yeah, absolutely. Or like, for me, it's like they don't understand that this is the 1,000th time that I've said my husband's dead. This is the 1,000th time that
Right.
I've had to explain these stories. It's their first time hearing it, so it's jarring for them. So they can't understand that almost stoicism to it, maybe.
Yeah.
Where I can say it so freely and without emotion, but it's like they don't understand. I've said this every single day for the past 2 years, like over 730 times at this point. So it's like at some point the weight leaves the words, and it's kind of learning to read that and balance it too, because you're like, this is this person's first time being introduced to my tragedy when this has been my reality for 2 years. So like finding that balance is difficult, especially when you're in the public eye, and especially when you are being so perceived.
Yep, absolutely. And I think back too, and I'm curious because I'm sure you still get this a lot. One of the things that I always find, and I always say to people, is that it is way more challenging to be the person supporting us than to be us in a lot of ways, right? So people don't know what to say. People don't know how to act, especially, I don't really experience that anymore, but like in the the first few years, and when you're I do experience it sometimes when, I'll say something like, someone will say, my brother graduated from the Naval Academy in 2004, and they're like, what's he doing now? And I'm like, well, he's dead. He died in Iraq, and they're just kind of like, and they don't know what to say. And I'm like, it's okay, But in the beginning, people really don't know what to say. They don't know how to address you. They don't know how to handle you. And a lot of times I would not give a lot of grace to people who said the wrong things. And I'm regretful of that now because I recognize how hard it was for them to even muster words to say. But, you know, Travis died at the height of the Iraq War. So I had a lot of people who would give me their perception on the Iraq War while comforting me and, you know, and consoling me on the loss of my brother. Like, oh, it's a shame he died in vain, you know, and he died for a war that we shouldn't be fighting. And I mean, I remember getting my hair done and I was in the shampoo bowl and they were washing my color out. And the woman said something like, yeah, can you believe we send all these young kids there and they're getting killed for nothing? I'm so sorry. And she was trying to be kind to me. And I lied there. And when she brought me up and put me in the towel, I said, I'm done. And I walked up and I paid. And I said some very unkind things to her. And I still think back and I'm regretful of the way I acted towards her because I know that she was trying to say it's, you know, I'm sorry for your loss. And, you know, and she was giving her opinion on world events but who cares about that, right? Our loved ones are gone. Have you experienced a lot of that?
Yes. Specifically in the time period and in the geographical period where my husband died, it brings up a lot of opinion from time to time. And
what do you mean? Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So my husband deployed October 7th of 2023 to the Mediterranean Sea right at the height of the Israel-Gaza situation. And so there were a lot of opinions that came about that. And there were a lot of unsolicited. And here's the thing, too, especially from people who don't know the military, especially from people who have this idea that they, you know, have a choice in their mission or that they have a choice. Like they sign up for duty and honor and service. And that is what that encompasses. And it doesn't matter what administration is there. And it doesn't matter, you know, what political party is in control at the time. It does not matter. Duty, honor, and service go beyond red and blue. It goes beyond politics. It goes beyond that's what patriotism is.
Yep.
And so I think a lot of what they don't understand too is that there's so many moving parts to different avenues. And when people want to give their opinion on it, most of the time it's coming from a place of not being able to understand, one, the logistics of things, and two, they can't fathom the nuance to service.
Yeah.
And you know, that changes. Someone signs a 6-year contract, you go through 2 presidents during that contract. Maybe you liked one, maybe you didn't like the other, and that's still your boss.
Yep.
That's still your commander in chief. So I got a lot of opinions during that time, and a lot of people said a lot of things that I didn't feel were very helpful to my situation, but also kind of like looking back, it's like people almost word vomit when they're uncomfortable.
Exactly.
In situations, and they almost like, and it's human nature, right? We see someone hurting and our initial instinct is to fix it. And this is something like I've been preaching over the past couple months is like, people ask me, well, what do I say? How do I help them? What do I say to help them get through this? What don't I say? There is nothing. You can check every single box. You can do everything the right way. If there was a manual to how to support someone in grief and you did everything perfectly, it would not be enough. You will not fix it. You will not make it okay. It doesn't matter if you say the right thing or the wrong thing. It doesn't matter. You're not going to fix it. You're not going to bring their person back. And so the best thing you can do is validate exactly where that person stands. Meet them where they are. Validate where they're standing right there. And that can change in 20 minutes. Sometimes I run through all 5 stages of grief before 9 a.m. So still. And so it's like, validate where they stand. 1 minute they're angry, 1 minute they're still in denial, 1 minute, you know, you just have to learn how to adjust and to not try to fix it because you're never going to fix it. You're never going to make it okay. But in that, you watch people around you kind of flail, kind of, you know, fish out of water when they're faced with tragedy that they can't imagine. There's the word vomit. There's the how to change the subject. There's this trying to maybe find some sense of camaraderie with opinion at times.
I remember
And
I
then,
had, I remember I had, it was actually my friend's mom, and she gave me a card, and my friend saw it on the table and read it, and she was like, "My mom's such an idiot." And the card said, "I'm so sorry. I had a miscarriage when I was 22. So I understand the loss of losing a child." And she felt that, and that was how she felt. But my friend was so pissed that she made that comparison of her miscarriage at 4 weeks pregnant to the loss of my 26-year-old brother. And she was like, "Oh, my mom's the biggest." And I'm like, no, no, no. In those are real feelings that your mom felt. And she was trying to find this common bridge, to say, "I understand loss." And that's what she was trying to say. I understand loss. So I was like, don't go too hard on your mom, but I get that so much.
and it's the depth of loss too, right?
Yeah.
That's the deepest that person has ever felt loss.
Right.
And so that pain is real because it's as deep as they've ever been. This is as deep as you've ever been. It's the depth to it. I get that. The number one thing I get all the time is it's not the same, but I have been divorced.
Yeah.
And and sometimes if they catch me on the wrong day, I'm like, let's be so for real.
Yeah.
But also, I remember I've been divorced. I was married once before. And so I remember that time period feeling like my life was crumbling and that I didn't know how to rebuild from this like life that I'd built. And in a way, there's a parallel to that, to losing a spouse. There's mourning a life that you're not going to live, a future you're not going to have with this person. And I think that maybe that's what they zero in on. And it's a way they don't want you to feel alone. And I think that's always what I go back to is like, yes, what they said was maybe a little insensitive, but they don't want me to be alone. And there's beauty in that, no matter how the words came out.
I had someone just recently on who lost her husband, unfortunately to just a quick illness. And she said that she finds that all the time. Divorcees, saying, "I understand, I'm divorced." And she's fired back. And we kind of again talked about like giving grace to that, and I understand, and I love the way you say like that's the depth of their loss, and that's so true, right? Because you don't know until you know, and hopefully you'll never know. Hopefully you'll never know the depth of the loss that you've experienced. Like that's the biggest thing we can hope for most people. How do you with your children? I always find, I have 3 kids. I only had one. My oldest was the only child I had that was alive when Travis was killed. And I mean, she was barely a year old. She was Travis's goddaughter. So she has the pictures with him. And she clearly doesn't have any real memories of him, but she's able to reflect back and see, here's me and my Uncle Travis. And he is very much alive in our house. My kids know him, and in ways that I want to make sure they knew not just Travis the Marine, they knew Travis the brother, they knew Travis at 10 years old and at 20 years old and at 26 years old and through all the different phases of his life. But I know people handle that differently. Like I had a friend in college, and he lost his brother in a car accident when he was in high school. And you literally could not talk about his brother. It was like kind of off limits. There were no pictures up of him. And it was like it was really like the mother, I don't want to say she erased him, but it was so painful for her that she couldn't actually have any reminders. And I remember the first time we went out to dinner with his parents, he said, "Don't say anything about my brother." And I was like, okay. And I didn't, I guess I found it a little bizarre at the time, but I didn't really, again, I had nothing to compare it to, right? And then when we lost Travis, I talk about him so much that I'm like, do people think this is weird, right? Like you see in the way I show up in online, like I'm constantly talking about my brother. Like he is a very big part of my identity. And so for my children as well, like how do you see and how do you want Andy to show up in your children's lives as they grow up,
Yeah, very much the same way. He's very alive in our house. Like his stuff is everywhere. His pictures are everywhere. Um, Obviously, with the time difference of all the different deployments, he had sent lots of videos to the kids talking to them because they would be asleep when he would try to FaceTime. And so he'd still want them to see him. So I have lots of videos of him talking to the kids.
So cool.
And so we play those every single night. My daughter, my son, they see them every single night. They hear from him every single night. And there's a sadness to it because my daughter now can recite the videos like with his cadence, like in his voice and the inflections and parts of his dialect. Like I see it come out, and there's sadness to that because it's like, gosh, she knows this because that's all she's ever heard him say. Like that's how she has to remember him. But there's also beauty in it that like I have this piece of him left to share with her. And so he's still very much alive in our house. And, my daughter likes tomatoes and I'll say, oh, daddy loved tomatoes. Or she has his blue eyes. And so when we get ready in the morning and she's like, I like your brown eyes. And I'm like, I love your blue eyes. Where are your blue eyes from? And she'll say they're from daddy. And so she knows that and she sees that. And my son as well, he FaceTimed me the other night and he said, I went and got pizza for your Andy today. And I said, oh, you got pizza? And she goes, remember, he liked sausage pizza. And one time my husband, he was on this kick and he ordered like 3 sausage pizzas. And he ate them over the course of 3 days as well. He was assessing and eating was like, you shove it and go. And so that was like his meal prep. And I always laugh about that. But it's so funny that that's a memory that stuck out for Jack. And he was like, I want to go get a sausage pizza for my Andy today.
Yeah.
And so, because he says my Andy, and then he'll say your Andy, because it's just a cute thing he does. But it's watching them also try to keep him alive through little things like that. And to speak to the families that like don't want to talk about it, I think we're slowly undoing that stigma. I think back then, and especially in the older generations, like grief was very stigmatized. It was something you didn't really talk about. And you kind of just were told to get over. I mean, think about like bereavement leave, 3 days, you get off work when someone you love dies. Your mom dies and you're just supposed to be okay 3 days later. Like that's insane to me, especially living it because I'm 2 years in and like I still have days I can't get out of the bed.
Yeah.
And so like I think we're slowly undoing that with having these conversations and keeping them alive because that's how you keep it going. And I want my children to the same. You want them to know your brother, not just the Marine. I want them to know the father that he was, not just the service and the sacrifice and the duty and the honor that he encompassed. I want them to know how silly he was and how much he wanted to be a girl dad and how excited he was when there was like pink confetti out of the cannons, and I want them to know all these little quirks about him so that they can carry them forward and tell their children that. And as long as we're talking about them, they stay alive.
Yeah. You want them to know that he loves sausage pizza, right? Like, yeah, those moments are so important. And I think we do begin to destigmatize it, honestly, through conversations like this and through not just having textbooks on grief. And I think for a long time, that is how people thought they needed to process grief. And it was very textbook and it was taboo. And you're right. Like when I first started writing online about Travis, I felt like I was a fish out of water. I felt like I was on my own. There was no one else doing it in the way that I was doing it. And I love when I see, when I saw you pop up on TikTok and you were so fresh from your loss and I saw you sharing your story and I also saw the other pieces of you because I think that's super important. Like it's who we are as the spouse and the sister, but it's also who we are as individuals. And I've started to find myself really wanting to people to know, like, I am the sister of a fallen Marine. I'm the daughter of a Marine Corps colonel. I'm the mother of a midshipman at the Naval Academy. But there's other facets to me that you'll probably find a little interesting. You might also cringe at some of those things. But I used to shy away from a lot of that. I used to, like, if you look back on my social media, it was kind of like grief business. right? It was like, I'm going to talk about these, but I didn't put any other facets to my life out there. And so you didn't really know me. And I think that also was probably hard for people to understand the bigger outlook of grief when they're just seeing, let me post about this today and this today, but not putting, I'm trying to find the right way to say it, but you do what I wanted to do for a long time, and I'm beginning to do that more. So I'm appreciative of seeing things like your love of Taylor Swift and you hanging out with your girlfriends and having martinis and, and showing those pieces of you is so, so important. Travis's legacy changed my life's trajectory. His loss has changed the trajectory of my life. And no matter where you go over the next 16 years until you're 18 years out from the loss of Andy, like what happened 2 years ago has changed the trajectory of your life. That's just a fact. As we close out, I think one of the things I always say is that I sometimes speak collectively for the Gold Star community. And I say, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I will. And I think the most important thing that we want as individuals is for our loved one's story not to be forgotten, right? Mm-hmm. Like I want people to know who Travis was. I don't want them to just know his name. And I see you do that as well. And I think you believe that as well. If there's one thing and one part of his story you want the world to remember, what is it?
I think really sitting with that and thinking about like if the roles were reversed, what would Andy be doing? And it would be the same thing. It would be showing up with kindness. It would be showing up for community, and holding people and meeting them where they are, because tragedy can strike anyone at any time, and it's debilitating, and it's a rebirth of this person learning to live in a world that their person doesn't exist in anymore. And I think about the way my husband would handle that and what I would want them to know about him, and it is his kindness and his joy and his love for life. And I think that is a huge thing, and we say it all the time, live, laugh, love, whatever, have ferocity for life, live intentionally. But to sit with those words and think about what they mean. I posted a photo for Veterans Day. My husband, he was reenlisting, swearing in with a flag on a cliffside. 24 hours later, that flag was wrapped around his casket. There were 24 hours between those photos. And that's such a stark visual to how quickly he was signing up for 6 more years, and he got 6 more hours. And looking at that, the words intentionally, living intentionally, becomes so much more heavier because you just very genuinely don't know. And so it is important to show up and give your best and love people your best and be kind and live in the ways that you want to be remembered. And my husband did that in such a way that it's so easy for me to love him beyond the grave. It is so easy for 500,000 people on the internet to love him for me. And that's a big thing for me, is like hearing people in South Africa, people in the UK, people in Australia, that they don't have Memorial Day or they don't do like a Veterans Day, but they sit a beer out for my husband. And they know his name halfway across the world. And that's the purpose, is like he lived with such intention and he lived so valiantly that his reputation goes far beyond his life and his death. And I think living intentionally so that happens for you too is the most important thing.
And I feel it too, Ashley, just through your, the videos and the stories that you shared of him. Like you said, Travis, like I feel like I know Andy, like seeing him in the room on the day you're giving birth, and the videos of him and, I don't know him, but I know he was super goofy. And I know how much he loved you because you show that to us. And so keep doing what you're doing. Ignore the criticism. And I say that, with someone who deals with their own set of criticism, and yeah, as a human, you got to just, it hurts sometimes. But I think having conversations like this, and I think it's for every 10 people that want to tell you that you're too extra and you're too much and you're saying too much and you're talking too much, it's that one message that comes through that says, you know, you don't know how much you helped me, that makes it all worth it. So I hope you continue to hold on to that. And I hope you continue to use your platform to share what it means to be a spouse that lost their loved one while serving this country. Because it's super important now more than ever, honestly. So I'm just so appreciative for what you do. And I thank you for showing up here today and for talking to us and talking to our community. And I hope we can continue together to shed a light on what it means to grieve and destigmatize some of the misconceptions that are out there.
Yeah, absolutely.